Ladies and gentlemen, I would love to welcome to the show friend of the program, Mike Solana. Thanks for being here, Mike.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Longtime listeners and followers on Twitter may have seen me very frequently refer to Mike, specifically like his writing on Pirate Wires. I think I've even tweeted that you're my favorite living author right now. So I guess kind of give us a little bit of background on what you do, because you also work at Founders Fund. You also have started this media company, Pirate Wires. Tell us a little about what your average day looks like. How many hats are you wearing?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, again, thank you so much for having me on. I love the Ruthless podcast. Huge fan. You, Smug, I mean, you've been a big part of my sort of media journey, honestly. So I'm a huge, not only am I a fan of your content, but I am grateful to you. I feel like you were one of the people who early on helped me cross over from tech spaces into sort of like political spaces as well. And so, and that's what I write about. I read about technology, politics, culture, kind of. I'm really interested at the intersection of those things and cover a lot of the stories, almost like a beat reporter at times, but I'm definitely like very much an opinion person.
Mm-hmm.
I work at Founders Fund. Founders Fund's a venture capital firm. So our job is to put money into startups. And if they grow, we make money. And if they die, we lose money. And that's kind of roughly how it works. My job over there is I'm a brand guy. So I am responsible for sort of putting our story out into the world. We tell a kind of story about the future. And my job is to attract talented young entrepreneurs to us, to make them want to take our money, basically, so we can then invest in their companies and kind of be a part of that entire thing. But sometime over the last maybe like 5 years, I've always been a writer, but I started just maybe more seriously, really just kind of, I guess, saying what I thought online. I think it was like, 2016, 2017, especially, I couldn't say nothing anymore. And then by the time 2020 came, it was like that summer when rioting was legalized.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I have to start talking about all this stuff in a more serious way, because I have a lot of opinions, and tech culture at that time in like 2017 was very, 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 I would say, virulently, I can't pronounce it right now, virulently sort of left wing, extremely woke. I would say it kind of like preceded a lot of the national cultural stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say things have really softened and changed over the last few years. And I like to think that I've been a small part of that. Just writing and what I think is a hopefully more nuanced way. I'm not trying to be super, super, I don't know, like a political sort of, I don't want to be obviously political, but I'm trying to just be honest about what's happening and sort of pull the curtain back and be like, okay, guys, this is what's happening. Like, here's maybe what we should actually be doing.
I think that's part of what makes like your writing specifically so fascinating, is because, the majority of the media that we consume these days is so clearly like partisan, like, exactly what kind of talking points are going to be there. But yours is a lot more observational and trying to connect the dots in almost like an analytical way.
That's what I just find it fascinating. Like, I find the way that people talk about these stories really interesting, and I think that they're revealing. And so I love to kind of look at an argument and be like, okay, here's what they're saying, but here's what they actually mean. Like, here's the argument that's being used. Here's the weapon that's been deployed for whatever political, nefarious, whatever purpose. Like, here's the actual intention. Here's the actual motive. Like, what are the invisible underpinnings of all of this stuff? And that's what I really get into at Pirate Wires, which is my media company. And that's the main, you were talking about my day-to-day, like Founders Fund. I love Founders Fund, hugely formative experience. I mean, Peter Thiel is my mentor, would have nothing without his sort of, I guess, just mentorship and guidance throughout the more formative parts of my career. But now mostly what I'm doing, I'm still at Founders Fund, but the majority of my time is spent on Pirate Wires. That's my media company. And it's like, I talk about this stuff. It's like the way that we tell stories. I cover tech, I cover politics, and really the way that these platforms and these technologies are shaping culture and politics. And I try and do it in a way that's like, I don't know, just interesting. And my only compass for that is what's interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, every time I read one of your writings, it feels like you've taken 1,000 steps back from where everyone is looking at something, and you get this like wide lens perspective. So, I mean, if you haven't yet, listener, I highly encourage you visit Pirate Wires. I guarantee you're going to find writing that you enjoy and that has you think differently about it. You brought a PT, and our mutual friend McDaniel, also a producer on the show, had a question that I absolutely have to ask you. Was there a Nick Fury, I'd like to talk with you about the Avengers Initiative moment?
Actually, yeah, there was. So I guess what you're saying there is like, was there a moment when, this like kind of larger than life figure approaches someone who maybe has some skills that he doesn't even understand himself and is like, do you want to do something better for the world? And I mean, absolutely, yes, there was. I mean, Peter found me in my early 20s. I was volunteering for a nonprofit. I used to be an editor for Penguin Books back then, really an assistant editor. So like the lowest you can possibly be. I mean, I made $30,000 a year. I couldn't even afford new shoes. Like legitimately, I was living in New York City at the time. And I met Peter just because I was volunteering for the Seasteading Institute, which is a nonprofit that he had put money into. And these guys wanted to build floating cities in the middle of the ocean. They're like, it was like an anarchist thing. And I was very much that back in the day. This was like, we're talking about 15 years ago now. 15 years ago now. So we became friends through that. And we had coffee whenever he would be in town, like once every 4 months or something, 5 months. And eventually he wanted me to work for him. And we kind of went through the process of interviews and things like this. And maybe it didn't quite work out. And I never really wanted to be a venture capitalist. I didn't even know what it was, honestly, when I first met him. All I was ever interested in back then was writing and politics. And he was, and technology in the abstract. So like he was involved in a lot of things that I found compelling as a writer and as a person who cared about the world. But like, I didn't want that job and I didn't want to be an investor. And I wasn't even sure that Silicon Valley was a place. I thought maybe it was like a metaphor. I really did not know. Didn't even know if you were to ask me what the technology industry was, I was like vaguely aware. I like knew that technology companies existed, but like that was the extent of it. And so I remember like ultimately like everything kind of summing to this dinner that I had with him. And this was the summer that I think it was the summer, it might have been the fall, when all of the country, like the major cities in the country, were experiencing the Occupy Wall Street protests.
I remember that. Yeah.
So it was like you might have some young listeners who don't even really remember that.
Wait, you were in New York at the time when they were in Zuccotti?
I was in New York City when that
kidding.
was happening. Yeah. So this was it was like before there was like the woke stuff. This was not woke. This was like pretty hardcore. It was like I would say like maybe like socialist protests that were gripping the nation. And I would say gripping
in an
the
interesting
nation.
way, it was also kind of like populist because it was aimed directly at the Wall Street crowd.
At Wall Street. Yeah. Yeah, it was. So we were at dinner and when this conversation happened and these two young people overheard us, we were talking about briefly, he and I were talking about the French Revolution came up somehow in the conversation. And these people, we were in Boston. So there was a version of this now that was about to take place in Boston. And it had not yet taken place, but it was coming. And these people leaned over and they're like, did you say revolution? And we were like, what? And they
like put down in that town.
It was crazy. They put down, literally gave us a flyer. This is like a nice restaurant. These like two young people like were kind of close. They put this flyer down on the table and it was like, the 99% must eat the 1%. And I'm sitting there like, I am literally at a table with a billionaire right now. They have no idea who we are. But in that dinner later on, it was like, I said this, I don't want to be a venture capitalist but I do feel like we're sort of on the same team. And he was like, we are. And it's a really, really small team. And I think what he meant by that was just maybe a worldview, a basic worldview that we shared and a commitment to thinking for ourselves. And that's like his major thing. But back then I didn't know who I was really. All right. I knew who I was, but I didn't know what I could do. Mm-hmm. And he kind of helped me focus my abilities and put them towards something good, I would say.
So you brought up something really interesting is the origin of crossing paths is seasteading, which got really popular among folks in San Francisco, especially because that shows exactly what happens when you've got a very poor government in place making decisions. It seems kind of like the seasteading has evolved into like Miami, where like there's been just this tech diaspora of people who are fed up with an environment in San Francisco where failure is almost not only accepted, it's encouraged among the government, where you've seen the local police have essentially, or the local officials have essentially legalized crime. Folks, don't like stepping out with their family for fear of like sitting on a needle if you're trying to ride a train. But a large segment of like the tech community seems to have set shop up in Miami, and you're among that.
Yeah, so the seasteading evolved directly into something called the charter cities movement. There are all these people trying to build these like de facto free cities around the world, and that's where those people kind of put their energy. I do think there's something related, like in the way that you're saying with Miami, where people, there's this exit thing. That's the similarity, where the impulse with seasteading is like everything is so broken that we're just going to leave and start our own thing. Here, it's like there's like the normie version of that. It concludes in a major city in the US that was sort of off the beaten path, becoming more high profile. That's certainly what's happened in Miami. I am here now. I'm a huge fan of San Francisco still, not the government. I hate the government there. I think it's almost terroristic in some sense, but I love the city and I love the people. Miami, it just like, for whatever, there are a lot of reasons that I'm here, and my life has just taken me here, and I'm happy to be here. And the big difference between Miami and I would say the rest of the country is people in Miami are interested in becoming something bigger and newer and better. Everyone here is okay with growth. They're excited about growth, with new buildings going up and with new people coming in. I don't know how long that's going to last, but for now, it's been really refreshing to see people excited about the future.
And it's incredibly rare to have a major city where the significant majority of the population is like violently anti-socialist.
Yes.
It's crazy that now the vast majority of large cities in the U.S., the majority of the voters would probably support socialism. Like you look at San Francisco, Los Angeles.
It's a South American thing. You have all sorts of refugees from Cuba and South America who are here from socialist countries. And so there is this, even while they vote for, like, this is not, it was a red wave here this last election, probably in Miami and Florida and nowhere else. Or maybe a little bit in New York City. I guess New York had some of this, but separate from that, Miami is still usually, like, I would say center, slightly left, not, totally left like most cities, but a little bit left. But socialism is not allowed. That is like the way that people throw around the word Nazi is the way that people throw around the word socialist in Miami. They really hate socialists.
And that's kind of an interesting seg. So speaking of kind of like socialists being removed, what has happened with Twitter recently is kind of breathtaking, with Elon taking charge.
Oh yeah.
And we're now seeing like he's revealed.
I mean, he stormed the Bastille.
Yeah.
He, seized the means of production. It's been a revolution in a sense.
And also, I think a lot of folks who listen have probably noticed almost daily Elon is tweeting with you. So
yeah,
I'd like your thoughts on that situation.
Man, I have so many thoughts. I will say that maybe the highest level thing is just, I do think this matters. Okay. Like, I really think that this sort of altered the course of history, which sounds crazy and, maybe a little hysterical. Like, who cares what happens at Twitter? I think everybody cares what happens at Twitter, because even if you don't care directly about Twitter, you follow somebody who cares about Twitter and who probably lives on Twitter, because all of the media personalities are on Twitter, and most of the people participating in culture, like creating culture, are on Twitter. Most of the politicos are on Twitter. All of our government officials, if they're not on Twitter themselves, their entire staff is on Twitter. That's where like the kind of the cultural and intellectual elite spend their time, is on Twitter. That's where they're battling over ideas. And that is where the news begins. It always starts on Twitter. And so whatever the rules are on that platform sort of shape the rest of the structure of our society. It really begins there and spreads outward. And for a long time, what we're now discovering, so Elon takes over, and he makes his bid 6 months ago to begin that process. And immediately people start on the left, which includes all of the media. And I want to be clear, like, I mean, the far left at this point. I'm not talking like I'm not even talking your Obama left. I'm talking your sort of activist left, which
Yes.
includes, again, a lot of people in the media and probably a lot of staffers in Washington and
Mhm.
things like this. They start losing their minds. And they were right, because what they perceived was a threat to de facto censorship control that they've had over the platform,
Yep.
for the last many years, but really since the election of Trump is when I think the real mainstreaming of the hardcore censorship powers began. And by 2020, COVID, you had the combination of COVID and all the Black Lives Matter stuff. Like, that confluence of events just it solidified the rules across the technology landscape. And it is this decentralized censorship apparatus that is loosely controlled by everyone who kind of agrees with each other. We're talking people in government, people in Hollywood, people in media, people in tech, people in academia, who all have the same opinions. So like, there is no one top down saying, we're going to censor, for the entire country, everyone who says the vaccine might have come from, or the virus might have come from a lab, right? Like, there's no one person saying that. You just have a small class of people who agree with everything and control everything, and they say that. What Elon Musk represents, what they kind of perceived he would represent, and what he has come to represent, is, I would say, not free speech, but a single platform that exists beyond that sort of de facto state censorship apparatus.
Yeah, I
He's
think
his
like
own thing.
2016 was kind of like this traumatic moment for a lot of the left and Hollywood and the media, where they never counted on an environment where uh, someone using Twitter could defeat the Clinton machine, where like
Right.
open dialogue, where someone can reach the audience directly, lightning fast, is able to overcome this decades long political machine. And I think after that, their conclusion was, okay, we've got to shut that down. We can't have a level playing field. We have to say not only that we need to have complete control, but it's because the other side is dangerous. Words are violence.
I would say
People
so.
will
Very,
die.
very smart. I think that's almost exactly right. With one thing is, they did not say we have to shut it down. Their first impulse was, they totally recognized the power of it. You were right that this power completely circumvents, every firewall they have between the people and power. But their first impulse was not to destroy it; it was to control it. And
Mhm.
it was like, let's see if we can take this power for ourselves. And it worked. They did.
Yes.
Within like a year, they controlled everything. And this led directly, up to the last election, the Hunter Biden laptop story fiasco and all of that. They did control the flow of information, basically, right? Like with like a few outliers here and there, they kind of roughly controlled it. And now that that's been pulled away, they don't have complete control, which means they really don't have control at all, because all you need is one place where you can say something else, and it ruins the whole machine. I think they've kind of fallen back on their the sort of other impulse, which is what you just said, which is to destroy it. And that's where we are now. Is you have people rising up everywhere. Their goal is just to destroy this thing. And we can talk about the advertising boycott they created. We can talk about the government getting involved. Like, I mean, whatever way you want to take this.
So I think advertising is a very interesting approach to seeing their methods that the left uses, where they've already captured so many institutions, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the mainstream media, which gives information to people, is completely dominated already by the left. Academia, all the professors completely dominated by the left to set up essentially just like indoctrination, where you've got people when they're young and exploring the world for the first time, almost without exception, their professors have one worldview, and that's the one that they will espouse and profess. And so I think Twitter is a perfect example of where the left has successfully captured, of so surprisingly, corporations now, where I remember the left in my day growing up is it'd be hippies who hate corporations, but now it's almost like the neoliberal Bernie revolution united, and the neoliberals took the tools of the Bernie activists and said, okay, we will capture the corporations and use them as our tool of control.
Yeah, this is the power left. It is, you're right. It's very, very different than the populist left, which is what maybe I think Bernie has probably become more of the power left as time has gone on. But if you think back to like Bernie Sanders versus Elizabeth Warren, if you were to follow that conversation online, the Bernie bros were considered highly problematic and anti-woke because they were like, she's stealing from our guy and basically hiding behind the fact that she's one, a woman, and two, Native American. These things are not, this is crazy. And they went nuts and they used all sorts of what we consider today like anti-woke language. That is the populist. Yeah, the populism is just super anti-woke no matter what direction it's coming from. And you're totally right that this is a very different kind of left. This is just what it looks like when the left actually has power, and they've had power for a long, I would say, I mean, for me, it's been coming most of my life. I feel like the last 5-10 years, it's really kind of metastasized, and it's the rules are different.
It's at the point where like you'd mentioned, the summer where rioting was legalized, you had, without exception, pretty much every major corporation in this country, whether it's Bank of America, donating to what essentially becomes a slush fund for people to buy mansions in California.
This is the woke stuff too. I mean, we always want to blame tech and be like, tech is so woke and all of this. I would say that tech is really overexposed. We have a lot of insight into what's happening in tech companies because everyone in tech is on Twitter talking about it. Like we're all exposing ourselves. We're like super native to the internet. Beyond that, I think that corporate America is a bigger problem. I think that like you look at like I have I'm dealing with a lot of lawyers right now as I work on. I'm not in trouble. I'm building a business.
It's one of the good times to use a lawyer.
It's a good time. Yeah, things are well. But I got a bunch of lawyers. They all have pronouns in their bio. It's like a very normalized thing. Like they're following the marching orders, and these are just regular people. I have friends in the world of nonprofits, right? Like all super woke. They're going to like woke seminars left and right. I mean, this stuff has been really normalized in every other place. In fact, I would say tech. Maybe the reason we talk about it so much is because tech is like the only place where it's still even a little bit pushed back against.
It's and I think also again in Florida you're seeing examples where DeSantis has gained so much popularity because he stood up to Disney, for example, which is completely unheard of. And it's amazing that the expectation among the majority of Americans at this point is that even our politicians have to take their marching orders from corporations, and they're okay with it. Like the modern left thinks that's actually the way it should be. So them using this stranglehold that they have on corporations to make their first instinct always, okay, boycott, cut the funding off from these individuals.
Yes.
And companies might benefit significantly from advertising on Twitter, but they're being pressured as like, okay, you are now normalizing Nazis. People are going to die if you advertise, which to me is just incredible. But right, so that's such a threat for people to be allowed to speak their mind.
Yeah, I mean that's. I know a couple of people on the Twitter ad team, or the Twitter sales team. So they deal with the advertisers, and they're like, listen, the advertisers have always been very, very kind of woke and sensitive to woke things. And like, this predates Elon, they were woker than anyone. I mean, than Twitter corporate, they were much woker. Twitter was just dealing with that. And I think a lot of the social media companies, as they grew up, a lot of the technology platforms as they grew up, had to learn to deal with these other industries where, like wokeness had captured the entire managerial class. In the case of this boycott, it was like, it was clearly an op. Like you clearly from the ground floor. I mean, the night that Elon took over, you had very popular activists online pretty much giving marching orders on how on the advertising. They were like, "Hey guys, looks like hate speech it's blown up on the platform. Elon's been in charge for 1 hour and already hate speech has quadrupled. He's a Nazi. He's loving Nazi speech. He's going to hurt people. Better tell the advertisers. Better let the advertisers know." And then within 24 hours, 48 hours, you had major stories from like NBC and the Washington Post. This is like the dark triad of Taylor Lorenz, Ben Collins, and Brandy, last name I can't pronounce, starts with a Z, like super long name. Those three people, like they drove a lot of these narratives that led directly to a fairly successful advertising boycott. What they didn't realize was that it wouldn't really matter because, I mean, first of all, I think Twitter has something like I got to go back and check my notes. I think it's $6 billion in cash on hand. And then, Elon just dramatically reduced the cost of operation because he fired and laid off so many people. So that's not going to work. Now they're going to move on to something else. The advertising boycott in the short term is not going to do anything. Long term, for sure, could kill the company. But I mean, long term, we're talking a year plus. Once all Elon needs is an advertising product that works, and then people are going to want to use it, because if it can communicate the traffic for your site or whatever, like, people are not going to care about this stuff.
That kind of you touched on it, that activist media nexus is really fascinating. The way that you have essentially they're just left-wing activists,
yes,
who then
experts,
will self-identify as an expert on internet hate speech or internet safety, even though there's no degree or accreditation that you can get to attain such a title. And then they will say an opinion that's basically the left-wing talking point, use Ben Collins, for example, at NBC, to launder the opinion, put it in writing, and then they can get that story pushed out and then put it in front of advertisers and say, hey, look, a major media organization is saying hate speech has exploded. That is just, it's incredible kind of feedback loop that they've built and almost perfected over the past few years.
Yeah, you see this. I mean, the most obvious example now is this, where like these people are looking to quote experts in online hate. I don't know what that is. What is an expert in online hate, or an expert in online safety? Like, what does that even mean to be safe online? And like, what makes you an expert in that? What did you study exactly? Like, these are just people who talk about these things all the time. Like in this way, I'm an expert on all of those things because I'm mired in these annoying ass conversations.
Yeah.
So like, I know everything about them. I'm fluent in the woke language, even though I hate it. Does that make me an expert in it? Am I woke? Like, it doesn't make any sense. But it's not supposed to make sense. It is just information war, and these are their tactics. Like, that's all this is. Ben Collins is a vicious state propagandist, and this is one of his tactics, is to identify people like Alejandra, whatever her last name, I forget I actually forget her name, but she's a popular trans activist who got James Lindsay deplatformed and a bunch of others. That's like mainly what she does, which, Godspeed, I'm not here to have a gender conversation. That's what she cares about. She's a left-wing gender activist. She wants to get James Lindsay deplatformed. Go for it. Like, off you go. But she's not an expert in like anything. She's just an activist. But she's not quoted as an activist. And the reason she's not quoted as an activist is not because Ben Collins is just an idiot, though he is. He is also a propagandist, and he knows what she is. If he frames her as an expert, then it has this, aura of credibility. He's the credible guy, making his credible statements online. And we're the like assholes who don't believe in science who are attacking him for it. But it's just not the case. All that's actually happening is we're paying attention, and the average person is not paying attention. And that's really what he's hoping for, is that most people don't look too closely, because once you do, it's very obvious what's happening. We're just, two different people with two different opinions disagreeing.
And I think that perfectly kind of encapsulates part of, like I said earlier, the perspective that you bring on Pirate Wires. I quickly want to touch on, what does the future look like for Pirate Wires? And again, I highly encourage all our listeners, check that place out.
Thank you. Yes, piratewires.com. Go and say hello to me. You can subscribe for free. Right now, I mean, it's like I do a sort of lay of the landscape once every 2 weeks, of a sort of big 2,000 word read of what's going on in the news and tech, politics, culture. We've been bringing in new voices. So like, we've been publishing stuff every week. The future of it is, I've got a managing editor coming on board. I've got a couple staff writers coming on board. I'd really love to get a couple of reporters on board and just start covering these things that I'm interested in a more serious way. So not just, me going after what I see, but having other people on staff to help me like report out stories. There's all sorts of stuff that I don't have time to cover. So I was just invited to Neuralink. This is a computer brain interface.
Yeah, the Elon company.
Yeah, so I was invited to go and check out the most recent updates and everything. I just didn't have the time. I couldn't get over there. So I want a team of people who can help me hit all these different stories. And we're going to be covering, mainly what I'm already interested in. So like weird science stuff, including not just like tech industry stuff and more industry sort of science adjacent stories, but also like the weird shit, like UFO shit and everything that has to do with like the ESP research and parapsychology. I'm really interested in all like the wacky stuff, the longevity stuff and the brain interface stuff. And what I mean, I would love to get a tech reporter who's willing to source stories from tech companies and other companies in America, from people who are not, in-house anti-tech activists, which is what is actually sourcing all of the stories in the mainstream press. Like, at the New York Times, the Washington Post, when anytime you ever read a story about tech and someone's like, like people at the company, 3 sources have said to me X, Y, and Z, those people are the 1% most aggrieved people in the entire industry. They're like extremely woke activists that just they hate the company, and that sort of shapes all of the stories about tech. So I want to have some real reporters in there fielding requests from other people, and also digging around and telling the stories that are not being told.
Amazing. Last 3 questions. So we always close our interviews with the same question. So Mike Solana, first question: what would be your last meal on Earth?
Wow, such a good question. I think it would have to be my mom's lasagna.
That's yeah, mine's pretty good too. Okay, second question. If you weren't doing what you do now, that includes Pirate Wires, that includes Founders Fund, that includes tech, what would your blue sky, perfect alternate world self be doing with his life?
I think I'd be running a tiki bar.
Great pick. Great pick. And last, what motivates you more, the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat? And to kind of explain this, your thrill of victory person is kind of like, your sunshine warrior, always charging up that hill. Agony of defeat is kind of like a Michael Jordan type, where your loss or your mistake always is a chip on your shoulder motivating you.
It's victory. I want to win, and I feel like I already have one, and I'm just doing the things that I need to do to get to the place where I ultimately am a champion. Like, I can feel it. I love it. I love the fight. I love being in the media every day, following the stories, which are all effectively arguments, beating them back, and, pushing forward towards world domination.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being on. Again, folks, that's piratewires.com. Check out Mike Solana's work there. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. And to all of your listeners, love you guys.